music.
No doubt.
All right.
Turn off my devices.
Oh, up. I want to go up. Good there. All right. All right, let's fade that out. It's 8 o'clock on the dot. 8 p.m. here in the Midwest. What time is it there in the Queen? What time is it there in Australia?
It is 1 p.m. 1 p.m.
Okay.
on Thursday afternoon in Sydney.
Okay. And if you're listening, if the sound and everything is okay, this thing ain't acting right for some reason.
Yeah, we getting some delayed feedback.
You can hear it like an echo, or how is it?
Echo. I am getting echo.
I think I got to go to headphones. My speaker's not working right. Can you hear me? How's that?
It essentially is a delayed feedback.
What do I do with my headphones? Oh, I got some headphones. I think if I go in my headphones, that'll fix that. So, what's up, Chauncey? I've been missing you. I'm gonna put on my headphones and see if that'll solve. Is that better? Is that better? Oh, now the camera's off. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Let me see if we get rid of the. Good. It seems that the actual delayed feedback is. Yeah, I hear you perfectly.
All right. Good. So I have to do this in headphones. Now, if you got to watch behind me on the camera. If somebody sneak up on me, I won't hear them.
Okay, I got you. I'm
on the south side of Chicago.
I am still getting delayed feedback.
It's probably delayed. I mean, you all the way in Australia, man. So
that's true. I just want to see what I need to focus on a particular voice. So, let me see. I'm gonna do this.
What's up, David?
Yeah, because those two voices, they're coming in pretty clearly and they're even tones. I need to find a way to get just one voice to come through.
All right. So, you good? How's that?
It's coming in about 5-second delay.
All right, so we'll just work with it, put it in the Lord's hands.
Okay.
All right, so before we get started, you want to introduce yourself. Actually, my Q&A before last, someone actually requested that I get you on here for a Q&A and discourse. So you got some you still have some fans here in the States, believe it or not. So
I'll take it.
If you want to give some background about your research, your status, where you are and why you're there, take a couple of minutes and then we'll just get into the Q&A and discourse portion of the broadcast.
All right, well, I go by Loxz, and basically I came out here to do study in resource management. I can tell you a lot. I can tell you a whole lot about my academic background, my own personal background, what I like to study. I did a lot of work in anthropology and human evolution. I was really interested in diversification of the human species, where we come from, in terms of how people became human. That turned into studying psychology, particularly evolutionary psychology, the brain, where we come from in terms of how do you behave, how do you think in terms of language, music. And then, goodness, about 10, 12 years ago, I had a mentor who wanted me to shift into study that had to do more policy focus. He thought that people who studied the actual long scope of history were probably better equipped to make policy decisions on a global scale. All right, whether it's local or global, those of us who actually study what we've done and how we've impacted were probably better informed about how we should actually plan policy into the future. So I actually shifted into studying international affairs. I started studying basically resources. So one of the things that I came up with is the idea that in the 21st century, access to raw minerals were going to be what access to petroleum was in the 20th century, what coal was in the 19th century. Before that, cotton, before that, sugar, spices, and all kinds of things. So I was just looking at governance, and I was looking at power, I was looking at access to power, I was looking at how people or governments pretty much enforce their power to square away how they get access to these minerals. So eventually I found my way to Australia for a variety of reasons. And once I got here, just to really, sum it up real quickly, I started finding out there was a lot more to study beyond what I thought I was studying. And I got drawn into studies about the long relationship between African folk and Aboriginal folk. And I started finding all these really interesting gems of history. Now, to be sure, I do not consider myself an expert in Aboriginal history. I can direct you to those people. Excellent work. But I do find myself having a very different perspective when it comes to understanding Blackness for Aboriginals, because they are Black people. They consider themselves Black people politically and actually. And then a Black person from abroad, from another context, who sees that me coming into this context wasn't the first time we were meeting each other. I started finding documents going to the 70s, the 40s, the 1920s, the 1780s, and then even before that. But I think to put a book on it, the thing that made me really reassess, wait a minute, maybe I should really take a look at something differently, is when I actually met someone, an Aboriginal activist, a woman who was actually she was one of the first members to the Black Panther Party in Australia. Now, at that point, I was new to the concept that there were Black Panthers in Australia. But she was actually one of the before she actually became Black Panther, who actually went to the States in the 60s to study with other organizers in Black Panthers. Her story actually interviewed her, and it's a part of my research that's ongoing right now that's going to be turning into an article, which might turn into some dissertation level work for a PhD. It may cause me to shift gears. I haven't decided, but I could not let that pass when I met her, because she's in her 70s now. No, she's in her 60s. She's in her 60s. And it was just such an incredible gem. So we could talk about that later. If anyone asks questions about it, we could talk about that. But yeah, there's a long relationship between Aboriginal folk, politically, historically, with other Africans, Black folk all over the planet. It's really interesting.
All right, I appreciate that. Let me shout out Zamaya, who requested a shout out. So there you go. There you have it. Now I think we can begin the formal Q&A and questions, comments, and criticisms. The focus is Pan-Africanism and the African diaspora, African Americans abroad, and things and related topics. But of course, we don't censor or limit any questions that come in. So feel free to ask your questions and offer your comments and so on and so forth. What's up, Phil? So we're also broadcasting on YouTube Live and Facebook. I know you absconded from Facebook some time ago, so this will be a brief return for you to that insidious platform. So, it's interesting just waiting on the questions to come in, and we're open for questions. And as they come in, again, you can ask questions about anything, but we're going to prioritize questions related to African Blacks living abroad, the African diaspora, and Pan-Africanism. But, it's interesting where you were making the distinction between Black people versus, or maybe I'm reading into it, African people, because a lot of scholars, a lot of Black anthropologists and researchers are finding everywhere they go, this is a predominantly Black planet. Whether you're talking about India, the Aboriginal Polynesian people in the Pacific Islands. But I think too many Black people in the United States that I engage with have a trouble distinguishing between Black and African, thinking that all Black people are African or all African people are Black exclusively. And there's, because of the history of denying us our history and a lot of the self-hate and self-rejection that is bred from generations of oppression, a lot of Black people try to escape into these non-African cultures or deny their African roots. And if they can find Black people in Asia, then they'll say, well, I'm Asian, I'm Black, there's Black people in Asia, I'm Aboriginal. Black, because many of the Native Americans were Black people. There's a serious issue of Black people claiming we're the Jews, we're the Native Americans. And I've been combating that attempt to formalize or legitimize self-hatred and self-rejection, denying that Black people here in the United States are members of the African diaspora. And even if we find Black people or melanated people across the globe, that doesn't make us them, not or make them us.
So do you want me to respond to that?
Yeah.
I definitely have a perspective on that. Definitely have a perspective on that. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry. I just stopped. I only stopped because, every now and then I get distracted by the feedback, but I hear you. So here's the answer. Here's the answer I have for you. You know what I mean? Personally for me, I oftentimes go between the use of the word Black, which I don't have a problem with. I know some people have this issue with, we're not okay, whatever, Black and African, but there are distinctions. There are distinctions to be made. I need to start at the beginning. All right, I need to start at the beginning because when it comes to trying to talk about humanity, all right, I have to try and get past a lot of the noise that exists on the internet in regards to trying to talk about matters of anthropology, archaeology, or human origins, because there's so many people out there who have just put out just really shaky, bad, uninformed positions, and I assume they're trying to be helpful. The term that we used to use, this goes back for me in high school, we should talk about something called ghettonetics, all right? I come from the time period of Black scholars defined by people like Dr. Diop, Dr. Van Sertima, Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, and we respected things like having a lot of erudition, being able to substantiate a position, being able to not go beyond what evidence can show you. It is definitely true that the further back in time you go, the Blacker the people are. In essence, the history of humanity, when you talk about archaeology, when you talk about anthropology, is the history of Black people, okay? But there are distinctions of culture and society that do occur after thousands and thousands of years. All right. But the major part that I'm hearing from you that I have a problem with is that we try and foist labels on peoples across the planet in an attempt to make them Black that can't be supported by the position. If we were to stay in Australia for now, all right, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, for me, are one of the unique cases because they are literally descendants of some of the first people to march out of Africa about 110,000 years ago. The earliest archaeological evidence of people to actually be in Australia are dated about 80,000 years now. About 80,000 years. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to start getting to the questions of our listeners, but okay. I'd like to just let this hang out there because this is something I've always had an issue with about humanity originating in Africa. And I guess I if you want to respond, we can go straight to the questions, but humanity didn't originate in Africa. Humanity originated in a landmass that came to be known as Africa.
Oh, sure.
Which are two different things. Mm-hmm. Because the problem when you say humanity originated in Africa and then you turn around and say Africa for Africans at home and abroad, then you could start to say, well, the British Empire wasn't doing anything but returning to its motherland, and right now in Uganda, you have East Indians there dominating the economy and discriminating. Gandhi would call Africans in South Africa's Kafirs, and he joined the Afrikaans in suppressing Black. So
yes, he did.
Humanity did not. So I think we need to make that distinction, not just for historical accuracy, not just for biological or nomenclature and distinctions of human beings, but for geopolitical and historical accuracy. That's.
I completely agree with you. Now, the conception of Africa, as far as the name and even the shape or the concept of continent, isn't something that you can trace to any group people. Any people say 150,000 years ago. We know it's a political construct that it's very recent, even the concept of the idea of a continent. All right. But what are we talking about here? What are we talking about? Are we talking about a distinction to make sure that we get trapped in a single place, or that the actual definition doesn't get used against us? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, I want to go to the questions. I mean, that's just something to let hang out there if the audience wants to get more into that. So, but that's just a distinction that I always have to make in order to just for the sake of accuracy, in terms of there's a lot of very sly and very cunning people who are enemies and potential exploiters of Africa who are beginning to embrace the whole all people are Africans because humanity originated in Africa. Humanity did not originate in Africa. My ancestors were brought from Africa because Africa was established as Africa and had distinct African cultures and characteristics when my ancestors were taken there. But when, early, humans migrated from Africa, there was no Africa, there was no Europe, there was no India, there was no Australia. So they didn't come from Africa, they came from a landmass. They have
an unnamed landmass.
Okay. So that's it.
Oh, no question.
Okay. We're going to start with our first question. Zamaya asks, do the Aboriginal Australians claim to be African descendants or just Black in the form of color and politics?
All right. Now, this is the part where it gets really complex. After a lot of conversations, the idea of Blackness and their linkages with all other Black peoples that we understand it to be now, it's one that is both it's political, and for some, it's also cultural genetic. It's not for all, because there are many Aboriginals who hold to their own conceptions about where human beings come from. And it's centered in their understanding of the creation of the universe that is unique to the many different voices that are Aboriginality. Because it's really important to understand that Aboriginals have a plethora of different cultural orientations. It's not just one single people, okay? But when Aboriginals talk about Blackness, a lot of the conversation has been shaped vis-a-vis how they have been impacted by whiteness. which is very similar to how it's impacted Black folk on the continent, Black folk in North America, Black folk in the Caribbean. When I talk with Aboriginal folk, you can see, whether it's admitted or not, that they have their linkages are specifically with the political struggle as defined by lots of major thinkers. All right. One of the things that hopefully we'll get to today is that the Aboriginal folk that I met had knowledge and deep understanding of most of the major thinkers in the Caribbean, in North America, and on the continent. And they saw the actual struggle as being not just similar, but identical to what they were going through with these British colonists on the Australian landmass. All right. So if you're asking me, oh, do they see themselves as African? See, that's where I have the same struggle as you in terms of using the word African, even though my own upbringing has a different relationship to the word African. For them, Aboriginal, it's not, again, it depends on who you talk to. You really have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Because I've talked to Aboriginal folk who see it as straight up genetic, as well as political, as well as cultural. And I'll see Aboriginals who are full-throated, trying to reclaim the actual Aboriginal conceptions from whatever mob they're from. But they see political connections. They see actual social connections. They see themselves as Black vis-a-vis the white folk that are on the continent. And they see the actual linkages between what Black folk go through in North America, the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa. So it's a complex question. It's a complex answer that's not going to give you something that's pat and neat. I want to make sure that people understand that. That's not going to be an easy answer. It's going to really depend on which sort of Aboriginal, what kind of Black folk person you're talking about, because it's going to vary. It's going to vary.
Okay. We're moving on to our next question from the real David Goodlow, good brother here. He asks, I'm very curious to know how/why the Aboriginals consider themselves Black politically and culturally. Can you elaborate?
All right. Yeah, sure. I can elaborate on that. As soon as I got to Australia, you can understand intellectually what Aboriginals are going through, because you can read a lot about it if you know where to actually look. But once you get here and you start talking to any of your Black fellas, you know what I'm saying? The ones who live in the city, the ones who are more rural, whatever have you, there's a lot of experience that they go through that's nearly identical to what Black folks went through, particularly in Jim Crow era North America. I'm not even sure I can find a corollary. If you understand how harsh it was for Aboriginal folk in Australia, and it still is in some places, I mean, because there are levels to this. We all know there's levels to this. You have to look at a really harsh sort of state-mandated oppression that you can say that you can see amongst, say, in apartheid South Africa, Jim Crow level South, maybe even Dalits in India. Okay, so there's at once Aboriginal folks were dispossessed from their land. At the same time, they were enslaved. This is a story that a lot of folk don't know about. Aboriginal folk had slavery in Australia. Australians don't like to acknowledge it. It's even less known outside the world, but that's the other thing I encountered when I came to Australia. There were interesting linkages between the end of the Confederacy and slavery in Australia. Let me tell you this real quick story. You remember when I told you about I met that old Aboriginal woman who's also Melanesian, which is another Black people from in the Pacific Islands, and she was talking about going to America. What she also told me, her family was called blackbirding. Now, if anyone knows what blackbirding is, blackbirding was a process in which white folk would basically steal Black folk from the Pacific Islands and Australia and force them into actual slavery. Now, the question is why? To answer that, you have to come back to North America. I'm sure Diallo and some of the listeners may know about this, but at the end of the Civil War, a lot of the white folk weren't content to just stick around and watch their Black people just go free. Some of them left. One of the areas that most people know about is that Confederates ended up in Brazil. Okay, you can go Google that yourselves. You can find descendants of Confederates still living in Brazil right now, dressed up in Confederate liveries. Really interesting. The other place that Confederates went was Australia, because they were looking to recreate their old empire of slavery in a place that was more amenable to them. And Australia was quite amenable. So if you go to the north of Australia, what they call the deep north, because of course we're in the southern hemisphere and it gets warm in the north and not in the south, they were setting up sugarcane fields all over the north. And they needed a slave system that would take advantage of huge amounts of people, but they didn't have as much experience with it as North American whites. And the Confederates gave them all the help they needed. Confederates showed them how to break, how to capture. And of course, they got the help of the actual Australians who already here about where to go to find these black folk. So blackbirding was a process by which they just captured people, broke them. And that went on for a while. It didn't like end in like, say, even the 1880s within Brazil. Enslavement of Aboriginal folk, depending on who you talk to, might have gone on as far as the 1960s, except that it wasn't happening on farms. It was domestic enslavement. So you'd have Aboriginal folks living with these white families on these townships as servants and sexual enslavement. This happened till very, very late. So a lot of the folk who end up in Australia were not even technically Aboriginals. They were from the various black islands of Melanesia, and they would have to go back and find out where they are from and such. She was one of those people who's half quote unquote Melanesian, half Aboriginal, and trying to find her heritage. So there's a really interesting linkage again between the end of the Confederacy and Australian slavery, but the linkages don't stop there. There's some other interesting linkages that go back to like the founding of Australia, but I'll let the next person ask a question.
All right, so I'm just gonna keep shooting these because we got a few in the bank. Kadir asks, what insights do you have about the concept of indigeneity across the diaspora? I guess this is what Diallo is touching on now. So what insights do you have about the concept of indigeneity? Sorry, I'm butchering that word.
Oh, I got you. I know exactly what you're trying to say. You know what I mean? All I think this is a concept that's going to be in flux in terms of what the definition is and who it applies to. Because of what Diallo is saying about the specialness of being a black person, or at least a black person who's still black in somewhat appearance. All right. Who is indigenous? If you start to spread it to like, oh, well, you know, the entire earth I'm indigenous to the entire planet. Because I could go as far as the thinking that Diallo is implying and just say, well, I'm indigenous to the entire planet. And then just make it this really amorphous, sort of loose definition. Or I could try and become more specific. Are you indigenous to Australia because you are Aboriginal and you've been here 80,000 years? Okay. Are you indigenous as I disagree with those who are trying to claim North American wow, I'm having problems with it too, indigeneity, because of perhaps a tenuous connection to some sort of North American. You know, to be honest with you, that's a whole show right there. The question of who came first, second, or third in North and South America, we can talk about that, all right?
Well,
I think it's more important that we focus on the political outcome of what it means to be indigenous and how you actually organize with other people who are trying to claim justice and form some sort of new social experiment to resist the aggression of not just white folk, but white ideas of social organization. Okay. So if you couch your resistance to white society simply as trying to keep white people out, as some have done in the past, and you don't extend it to white conceptions of how to organize human social formation, you're in a problem. Because even if white society disappeared overnight, you'd still be living in systems pretty much understood to be originating in their conceptions of what a good life is supposed to be. Okay?
Well,
interestingly enough, living in Australia has given me some new insights to just how far gone the North American white society is in comparison to a lot of the other ones. But we can talk about that too. I mean, I hope that will answer your question, Kadir.
Well, in my point of view, you can't separate the concept, the political concept in the political context, not just the geographical or historical, but in a political context, you can't separate the term or the assertion or the validity of indigenous or indigeneity from colonization, because prior to that, it wasn't really a concept that had to be argued, disputed, or asserted.
You're right.
When you find people in power, you don't really find the arguments or assertions or debates or cultural movements around indigenous. Like you rarely hear someone talk about I'm indigenous European or I'm an indigenous British, or even if you go to somewhere like Nigeria where they say I am an indigenous Nigeria, you mostly hear people making claims about being indigenous in parts of Latin America where over 97% of the native population was exterminated, in the USA where the native population was still to this day is under an active campaign of genocide and living in concentration camps. So the concept of indigenousness and determining who is indigenous and trying to set aside rights and set aside lands and speak to the needs of the indigenous population, that is a byproduct of colonial domination.
No question.
And so when African people start to, in the United States, there's a whole Black indigenous movement where they're talking about foundational Black Americans, or the Americans that have been here since chattel slavery, having more of a legitimate claim to the land. And many, there's been conflicts of African people, because my great grandfather, Sonics Bowie, was born and raised on a Lakota reservation in the Oklahomas. And they're the Black Indians. I never go around talking about I'm part Indian, I'm half Indian. I make no claims to the indigenous, because African people got Indian blood the same way we got white blood because Native Americans owned Black people, enslaved Black people, and raped Black people. So I don't claim, the rapist heritage. So I don't think in the modern era, if we're having discussions around indigenous struggles, indigenous rights, or indigenous identities, that you can separate that from colonization. Because if not for colonization and European imperialism and other, neo-imperialist Chinese and things of that nature, and you wouldn't really have so much conflict around who's indigenous and what should be afforded to the indigenous populations versus the invaders, the colonizers, and then the forced immigrants who were brought there against their will, and now they have to make a way there. So all those issues are interrelated. And I think that if an enslaved or colonized people should stand in solidarity. If you find yourself on a colonized land, you are a forced immigrant or a migrant there, you should hold solidarity with the indigenous people in their struggle, as opposed to holding solidarity with the invaders and the colonizers. And that's where I stand. Although I know the history, I'm in solidarity with the Native Americans of the United States in their efforts to secure justice and even to expel their colonizers, while I don't feel that I need to make claims of indigenous standing or indigenous clout in order to have that legitimate stance in this land.
Oh, no question. I completely agree with that stance. You know what I mean? If you're talking about, the idea of the promotion of indigenous as a title, it's definitely a relic, if you want to call it a relic, because we're still living in it, of coming in contact with particular Europeans. But I can hear some of the naysayers in my head, because I follow all the people who supposedly oppose me all the time. They'll say, "Oh, people invade each other all the time." This is definitely what Europeans have done is definitely different. But I completely hear what you're saying about the conversation about indigenous is linked to the colonial experience, no question. And it's funny that you should bring up the question of standing in solidarity with those who are indigenous, because I see it as simply a justice claim. If I come to a place and I see the people have so many similarities to me in terms of exactly what the actual origins of the problems of the life are, if you choose your own mission, if you're true to your own justice claim, you have to, out of moral, you have a moral obligation to stand in solidarity with them. I completely agree with you, which is what makes it so reprehensible what I see a lot of folk who come here actually do, including some of the Black folk that I know who are also in Australia. All right. That is also what you can talk about, because, I think there's a conversation to be had here about what happened recently to the two sisters who were, where were they? I believe they were in Indonesia. They went to Indonesia and then they got deported because of some things that had happened. And I've seen that sort of thing happen in a few places around here. I don't know if we have time to talk about it, but there were definitely some things that happened that are similar to the kind of deaf ear that can happen to us when we don't pay attention to the local problems of the folk who are also fighting against the white folk who may be dominating in their region, or sometimes the Asian folk who are dominating them in their region. That's something that comes up right next door in Papua New Guinea or in West Papua, vis-a-vis the Indonesian government. So,
all right. So David asks, do your studies and analysis follow along the lines of Dr. Runoko Rashidi's?
I would need it to be a little bit more specific.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll leave that for you. I will say this. No, I won't say that. Okay.
What would you say again? Say again, Diallo. I missed that last part.
I was going to say something, but I'm not going to say it. I don't know, because there's a difference. The distinction between excavating and compiling information versus the meaning we impart to that information.
Yes.
I think he sometimes does a disservice because he talks about, well, everybody's Black and we find Black people in Asia and Black people in this place. And I don't think he works hard enough to say, they're Black but they're not African. And those Black people have their own distinct culture that has so that whole Black people are everywhere, everybody Black and Black people are everybody. I just don't think that is I don't think it's accurate, number one. And
accurate as far as what?
In terms of, Runoko, I think he's part of that whole what I call the ego inflation history, where Black people have been so broken down, saying, well, Black people have contributed nothing. That old European effort to say, well, Black people have contributed nothing of value to humanity. So many historians, archaeologists, and researchers went about the task to demonstrating to Black people and white people that Black people have made great contributions to the human civilization. Black people, Black Britons, remember the book, The Black Britons?
Oh, yeah, sure. And, all the J.A. Rogers works.
Right, and showing how Black people have made contributions to all these cultures and how Black people are found present throughout the world and throughout history, and trying to dig out and identify the Black presence throughout history, trying to basically demonstrate our worth and value to other people. It's what Dr. Amos Wilson came to call historical contributionism.
Yeah,
trying to demonstrate to our oppressors specifically our worthiness of their respect and our worthiness for our participation in their systems and societies. And I think he dances around that line a bit. That's me talking, so I don't want you to get in trouble with Dr. Rashidi.
Oh no!
That's me talking.
It's okay. Okay, it's okay. So let me answer that. Because now, if this was the answer, if this is what David was asking, I can answer that.
No, I ain't saying that's what he.
I'm gonna state this first. If anyone sees me with my eyes closed, all right. If you guys don't know, because you might have come in late, I'm getting a lot of feedback in. And I need to close my eyes because watching either one of us talk on screen is actually throwing me off. So just to keep my train of thought, I'm gonna have to keep my eyes closed so I can just concentrate on Diallo's voice and not get thrown off. Now, there's a couple of things here. Here's my perspective on these sort of Black people here and there. You know what I mean? First, let's answer the question of this sort of historical contributionism. There's definitely a through line you see to this day with certain people who make documentaries about supposedly black people here or there. Now, we may have been here and there, but the sort of obsession on it definitely, particularly when it doesn't really lead to any sort of actually qualitative changes in our daily lives. I can see exactly what Amos Wilson is talking about. All right. It's important to understand these things, but when you become obsessed over it because of a deficit in your own sort of psychological well-being, it may be more important to treat the psychological deficiencies in yourself than trying to plug it with a whole bunch of dates and names and places. That's what I'll say there. All right. A little tricky because you need to know those things. But if that's all you ever do, then you're not really changing the fact that, oh my God, I can't really find a place to work. Oh my God, I'm getting killed by the cops. Oh my God. Why is my home country being overthrown in another coup started by the United States? That's not gonna really solve those problems. However, this is my position as far as, say, the black faces you find in, say, the Andaman Islands or in Melanesia or in Aboriginal Australia or in the Philippines. There's another story that needs correcting, that it's important to just telling the truth about what actually happened. I'm starting to get a more clear understanding of your issues with the word African, because now I'm saying, I see where I agree with you. The point you made about, okay, if you've left Africa 110,000 years ago, because in the context of Aboriginal Australia, the first sites archaeological are about 80 to 85,000 years. So you must have left even earlier before that. And it wasn't a straight line. People are just fissioning off camps, and slowly you end up in Australia. The people who live here have another 80,000 years of history on top of that. We know, if we know anything, time changes culture. And are they still African in terms of culture? Certainly the language is not. They're clearly separate languages from that which we know they must have come from that landmass we now know as Africa, but the culture isn't the same. Now, I definitely take that. But my investigation into these various pockets of humanity were really more linked to trying to understand, well, what did these humans actually look like when they left this landmass we now know as Africa? And how under what conditions did humans begin to change in other parts of the world? Can we prove, is there a way to prove that humanity has some sort of central a focal point, and what it means that people who ended up in parts of Asia and Europe or even North America look very different? The only thing I find fascinating about this is that where you find these black-skinned, curly-haired, the morphology in terms of face and a few other things, you find them clearly around the Indian Ocean, where they don't get to higher latitudes where these things might affect their actual stature. I'll only answer this last point. I've heard from time to time, both from some professionals and some people on the internet, that because Aboriginal Australians or Melanesians, when you do genetic analysis, are pretty divergent from Africans, that therefore that is proof that they have nothing to do with black people, present-day black peoples you can find in Africa. And that does not support that contention. It's actually proof of the fact that they probably are exactly who we think they are. Keep this in mind. Any population of organisms, plants, animals, fungi, if you separate them long enough, even if they appear to be physiologically the same, at the genetic level, they're slowly going to accumulate all sorts of differences that's going to betray the fact that at some point in deep time they were separated, even when they look similar. It's curious to understand. Check this out. Modern day Europeans, when you analyze their DNA, are closer to modern day Africans than Aboriginal Australians are. In fact, when you look at archaeologically, there weren't modern humans living in Europe until about between 40 and 60,000 years ago. But there's proof of humans living in Australia 85,000 years ago. Now think about the time scales we're talking about. Tens of thousands of years. you have a group of people who morphologically, phenotypically look very divergent from Africans. Asians fall into this as well, all right? But they're closer genetically to modern-day Africans than than Aboriginals, Melanesians, Papua New Guineans, and they look far closer to modern-day African populations. I wanted to put that out there just as an interesting, it's not a thought experiment because it's actual, that the idea of relatedness is a lot more complex than simply what you look like. Although there are arenas in which that is important. But don't let anyone say that simply the genetic evidence is proof that these populations have nothing to do with the populations we now know as modern day Africans. There's no even guarantee that the first peoples who are actually filtering out of the modern day African continent are even still existent on the African continent, because there's only a few people actually left at a time. Those in the east and the south were filtering out due to a few different climatic reasons having to do with geological catastrophe. There's an interesting hypothesis around a Toba event about 70,000 years ago that led to an even larger ejection of humanity and such. But as far as the original question is concerned, these are questions of just of the historical record. Who came first, second, and third? Why do they look the way they do? Why do populations drift? And where other populations who look very different are to this day? But they don't necessarily have to answer questions of identity as far as finding meaning within yourself. That's again linked to this whole situation that you talked about earlier with the colonial experience. Not every investigation I may involve myself in this case anthropologically, need be linked to trying to knit together some sort of identity issue in the African population. It may simply be, well, I consider it to be my job. I want to know who these people were. It's an interesting answer that could answer that in a person's toolbox of questions for themselves, or it may just simply be incidental. All right. My only contribution is trying to make sure the record is set straight, because there's a lot of bad science, if you want to call it that, just rolling around out there.
Right. Okay. Now, Digital Revolutionary asks, Diallo, say you had a big tech company that was worth millions, but you woke up one day and knew everything you know now as a revolutionary. What would you do from there on? You know, I get these questions a lot. Someone asked me, you know, if Jay-Z gave me $10 million. I think if you could find my my breakdown of when the guy asked me, what if I got $10 million bag from Jay-Z, what would I do if I had Oprah money or if I had a big tech company? I would simply redistribute those resources in such a manner to advance the just aspirations of African people. I would have above ground and underground methodology for redistribution of that wealth. I am anti. I don't think that billionaires or millionaires have a right to exist. I am a socialist. So I would turn the tech company into a cooperative so that all of the people who work to generate the wealth of that tech company have an ownership stake, so that it operates as a cooperative, and whatever fiat that has been amassed by me by being a parasite owner of a big tech company, I would work to redistribute that in such a way that that advance the interest of African people in terms of decolonization, abolishment of capitalism, and ecological advancement, building up biodiversity. But I went into more detail like that if I woke up and some black mogul had given me a bag. So if you could look that up, but I would make revolution with it. And I would probably get the new Xbox Series X. And after that, all revolution. Okay, moving on. Phil says, this isn't directly a Pan-African question, but what is your guess from for the age of humanity, Homo sapien? 200,000 years, perhaps?
Okay, so yeah, this is a great question. You know, when I was first doing undergrad, that was the rough estimate, about 150 to 200,000 years. But that's pretty old. That's pretty old now. Even when I was doing undergrad, it's like the late 90s and whatnot. You can still find people. This is Dr. Walpoff. You can look up. He was, I was at University of Minnesota or something. You can still find white folk trying to push the polygenetic theory, where they were saying that African or black populations and European or white populations had absolutely nothing to do with each other. They were completely independently evolved. And the evidence just doesn't bear that out. There's just too many similarities. It's just really clear. Speciation is clearly not what has happened in between the populations that we now consider to be quote unquote racist. I'll answer that later in terms of the question about whether or not race is real or not. The answers may surprise you. But to answer the question of age, all right, 200,000 years is too young. Okay. There have been some really interesting finds in the last 10 years in North Africa and in South Africa. Now imagine that in Morocco and in the state nation of South Africa, we're finding anatomically modern human skulls. And in the case of South Africa, pretty modern skeletons. And they're pretty old, 250,000, 230,000. It's clear that when you pair that up with the genetic evidence, where you just study the genetic evidence, Homo sapiens go back about 300,000 years. 300,000 years. Now, I'll say this too. I'll say this too, because there's something out there that a lot of, usually black folk, we get real proud of ourselves when we talk about, oh, I don't got no Neanderthal in me. Only white folk in Asia got Neanderthal. Now, you have to be careful about that. Because, you know, if you're not deep into, you know, paleoanthropology, you may not know about some of this stuff. We've known for a long time that Homo sapiens didn't evolve from a single lineage within Africa either. All right? There were multiple lineages that were constantly cross-pollinating, if you want to call it that, all over the continent. And the pretty much confluence of all of those was what leapt out of that is what we now know as Homo sapiens. And the evidence that we were looking for finally came up a few years ago in one of these genetic tests where they found some African-American dude from I don't know if it's South Carolina, North Carolina, and he had some sort of interesting sections of his DNA that when they did the math on how old it was older than all Homo sapiens in terms of the dating up until that time. All right. I don't want to give you too much, just, you know, because you can Google all this. You can find all this yourself. But it was clear that there was a section of DNA, and they tracked it all the way back to Cameroon too. Back all to Cameroon. That was clearly from something that wasn't Homo sapien. All right. What I'm trying to say is this: be careful with the actual bashing of Neanderthals. Neanderthals aren't what most people think they are. Neanderthals aren't even European. You know, I saw you do the Iceman's inheritance. I get all the actual imagery we associate with it. That's fine. But as far as, you know, Neanderthal stuff, our modern African populations as well, we have a lot of interesting things floating around there. Because the reality is, species are born from more complex processes than simple single lineage evolution. Answer to your question, genetic evidence and the fossil evidence are showing about 300,000 years. About 300,000 years. All right. Maybe we find something that pushes it back further. It's possible. Could you get a 400,000-year Homo sapiens? Maybe, but from the skulls that we saw, they're already showing slight differences with modern humans. So if you push it back even further, you start getting to that place where how much of a difference is a difference to be a difference. All right. So, you know, I'm comfortable with 300,000 years. I was always kind of leery with 150,000 years because if you understand the process of evolution, that's a really tight window. It's a very tight window. You need more time to develop a species that is as widespread as humans. I'll leave you one more thing, because you read about this. It's bad science that you'll find in European textbooks to this day. They'll often refer to like the European miracle. Something happened 40,000 years ago, an explosion of consciousness. Oh, you see the cave paintings in Europe. And this is where, you know, this is bad paleontology. All right. It used to be linked to just outwardly racist ideas that the European man was where language and music and all kinds of abstract thinking took place. This is absurd, because the people you see in Australia are already cave painting with the same amount of abstract, ornate sort of ability that you see in the cave paintings of France or Germany. You can see them in rock art in the Sahara in South Africa. Or so whatever happened in terms of language, in terms of abstract thinking, must have happened in deep time, because all humans have it. Whether you're in Japan or in Australia, Africa, all humans have these abilities. There's nothing special about what you see being done in Europe. All right, this is something that it implies a deep heritage. Okay, right. All right. I'll leave you with this: human beings were human acting and human thinking probably longer than we were actually human looking.
Yeah. I would probably put humans, the emergence of something we would call conscious, self-aware, and tool constructing humans. I mean, it goes back much further than 200 or 300,000 years.
Oh man, yeah.
And you know, with Diop's two cradle theory, and I think that's a oversimplification. I think there are a multitude of cradles, reemergence of civilizations, and the extinction or the fading of civilization, and populations of humans that reach what we would identify high levels of civilizations, and then regress to progress to what we would call primitive existence. I don't think that. I think the absurdist notion that human progress and human civilization that has been on a linear progressive path, which is something that the Bradley and the Iceman's Heritage talk about, where human existence is just one straight path towards advancement and development. When there have been breaks, stops, reversals, and loops, and stagnation, rapid progress that come up against rapid stagnation. So it's the problem is why we can't honestly make these assessments is because of global white hegemony and supremacist pathological insecurity and supremacist ideas, where there are values beyond historical and scientific inputs, where there are ideological, political, and even economic implications. It's very a lot of African people who came up with the concept, indoctrinated into the concept that the first humanity started with an Adam and an Eve, two people created, one man created from clay, and another man created and a woman created from a woman's ribs. And for many generations, Africans came up under the notion that Adam and Eve were two white people, and white people promoted the concept that because white God created a white man and woman, that they were the original people, and that they are the mothers and fathers of not just humanity, but of civilization and righteousness. And when we die, if we live a godly life, we will be made white. And there are many black people to this day who that is their concept of what he say, the age of humanity is about 2,000 years old. The earth was made in 2 days. Many black people live their lives and fully commit to this on the African continent and abroad. But then there was a new concept going back to Leakey and the other Europeans. The white man said, well, actually, humanity started in Africa. White people flipped and said, well, we were the superior race because we were the first that God made, and we are the mothers and fathers of civilization and humanity. When the scientific community said, well, actually, we humans weren't created by a God, we evolved from lesser forms. So now, because Europeans were some of the newest manifestations of humanity, therefore we are the most refined, we are the most beautiful, we are the most advanced, and the primitive ape-like savages that came before us. So no matter whether you take a religious or a scientific approach, white people, Europeans, our oppressors, have infused, or what I say, contaminated these understandings with political, ideological, and even materialist distortions that force us to, instead of just engaging this as expanding human understandings about our origins, to a fight for legitimacy and a fight for our very humanity, and Black Lives Matter. And so I know that where you talk about what we could debate race and things of that nature, it's impossible. This is not pure academics. And this is not pure science. And it's not about the facts and what could be proven. There is a deep-seated ideological, economic, and even to who is worthy to rule the world, and who is worthy to expand, and what culture should dominate in what region, and whose interests are the superior when interests are in conflict. So it's so much more there. So even I don't think that, because even here in the United States, there's a big push to get Black people into STEM. And I think it's very dangerous, because cultural, ideological, even in the understandings of art and philosophy are more important, because Amos Wilson said, simply having the technological know-how and having material resources we got in Nigeria, some the most expertise engineering and mathematical minds come out of Nigeria. And Nigeria has some of the wealth of mineral and natural resources and geographical blessings in terms of the ability to create crops, but yet they're colonized and under neo-colonial exploitation, because ideology and cultural orientation, and even understanding those roots of tribalism and ethnic conflict that were fed by and exacerbated by the British colonizers, and now AFRICOM and the neo-colonizers and the Chinese coming into there. So I wish that people like you could do your work and just basically work towards the truth and reveal the truth. But there is an ideological and political component to
it's all political. Absolutely.
Computer science. There's no way to escape it.
It's all political. I mean, I was particularly the beginnings of your statement that you came into. If you study the history of the argument, I'm always telling people, study the genealogy of the ideas. You can clearly see how the actual science of anthropology, and particularly human paleontology, was being affected by European racial and political aims. Right. So they kept on twisting the actual data to fit what was necessary for European self-image and for use abroad for all peoples. So if you look at the history of the argument in terms of human origins, at one point it was completely biblical, and then they went to, humans have this heritage that's that exists along with the rest of the animals of the actual earth, but they started in Europe, and then the actual fossil record wouldn't support that. But okay, they started in the Middle East, and the fossil record wouldn't support that. Okay, they started in Africa, but we were born in Africa, but we had our education in Europe. And then when it became untenable, they start to say things, well, they started in Africa, but then they had that miracle we talked about earlier in Europe with cavemen, and then they start to latch onto Neanderthals, and they start to make frauds like Piltdown Men. And then what I'm starting to hear now, what you hear now in the discipline, because I'm going somewhere with this, is that they flip from they've tried to make the statement that they're the oldest and that makes them better. They say they're the youngest and they're the most evolved. So you can see it's always flipping to try and make it because the ideas serve their own culture, and it also serves as a weapon against other cultures. All right. The confirmation that it was all political really hit home for me because remember, what I'm talking to you guys right now, as far as anthropology, human paleontology, I'm not professionally in that world anymore. I'm in the world of international affairs. So I teach a class at University of Sydney where we're talking about basically U.S. foreign policy and culture. Also teaching a med school at another university. I also teach classes in basically, it's not resource management, but it's basically metal extraction. Well, I'll talk to you guys all day on what metals does what and how you use it as predictors for conflict and whatnot. And you can see the history of international relations, international affairs, and how it's basically a conversation between European powers trying to mediate conflict between themselves. Oh, they've extended it to the rest of the world. but it's clear it's not really about you or quote unquote us. It's about how they exist in the world. And you can find it in pretty much all of academia. So if you're going to be in academia, you got to be really clear about, you know, concepts like being dispassionate, being, what is the word? I can't believe I'm having a brain freeze right now. What's the word they love to use all the time? I'm sorry, objectivity. Yeah. All right, that this is, we're being completely rational, that we don't have a position here. This is simply what it is. All right.
Yeah. I think that we just have to accept, you know, going back to George Jackson and his philosophical position. As an oppressed people, everything we have needs to be oriented as an instrument in our liberation.
Sure.
And everything we engage in needs to be oriented towards opposition to our oppression and driving us towards liberation. And we already know that the dominant culture has weaponized everything from sex to music to the atom. So, you know, but Maui asks or states that you got to talk about Blow's The Devil You Know, which is a Black Power manifesto. Are you familiar with Charles Blow? He's a journalist here in the U.S., but I haven't read the book yet. It's actually on my reading list, so I'm not going to speak on it. But I don't know if you know about that book, The Devil You Know.
No, I haven't read that one yet.
All right, so we'll have to shelf that one. We don't have any comment on that as yet, but I do intend to read that book, and I'm already, well, my current, it's downstairs, but I'm going to be reviewing Blueprint, Black on Black Crime. I'm actually going to be reviewing Black on Black Violence, and then Who Stole the Show. And I got a few books, but that's definitely on the Bro.Diallo review list, the Manifesto for Black Power, but no comment on that just now. We're going to have to, we're coming up on time. So let's see if we can do a rapid, no more than a few sentence responses to the question. We get to as many because we got several in the bank. Jamila asked, how do you feel about utilizing Huey P. Newton's third world internationalism ideology as the new basis of Pan-Africanism? I'm sorry. What were you saying?
I was going to say who that question was for.
Hey, you take it.
It's funny. It was funny. I only want to say that basically that. I was going to say that it's basically the basis for the acceptance of the Black Panther ideology in Australia. The Aboriginal folk clearly saw the advantages of using the Black Panther Party's platform in fighting against white domination in Australia, and it was incredibly successful. Incredibly successful. I want to suggest some books right now, but I don't have them in front of me right now that show you how incredibly successful that Aboriginals adapted things like alliances with other groups of people that have similar interests, but even more so, I'm still stuck on the programs that the Black Panther Party utilized that had incredible impact on the kind of destitution that Aboriginal communities were facing. Right. Whether you're talking about clinics, we're talking about food pantries, after school, preschool programs, incredibly useful. The prerequisite for any sort of alliances, particularly for Aboriginal people, has to be what is it? How do they say it? How politically committed the individuals or the organizations that you're trying to align with actually are, and how much they're willing to throw in with you. It's not necessarily hard to assess, but it is an assessment that needs to be made. Unfortunately, I don't have any hard and fast answers to it. But I know based on the kind of reaction it engendered here and in the United States, going for some sort of alliance that's actually substantive does appear to make power structures afraid. I can see examples for it in the recent history politically of the United States, in the Caribbean with what happened with the Pan-African Federation, and surely here with Australia, or amongst Aboriginal Australia. Doing the work, though, something else is different. I think it should be actually followed. I don't think there's any answer to most of our issues without making alliances with other folk who also have similar problems, interests, and resources that we can share with each other. It has to be done. All right. Any sort of retreat into some sort of hyper nationalism is literally, for me, an evolutionary dead end.
Right. I agree with you on that point. I mean, we have to realize that Huey was writing in the 70s. You know, he was coming up with these ideas in the 70s. There was no internet. You know, there was no European Union. There were still many nations that were still under direct or neo-colonialism, and this was prior to climate disruption. And I mean, there's been so much to change that I think that the fundamental ideas of Black liberation, Pan-African solidarity, the ideology of Pan-Africanism, the culture of Pan-Africanism versus the specific agenda of Pan-Africanism. I do think that Huey P. Newton's third world internationalism and intracommunalism is a valued aspect of it, but I don't think that it needs necessarily be the basis. What she used a new basis for Pan-Africanism. I don't think that Pan-Africanism is in need of a new basis because the fundamentals of it are still strong. So I always think that could be, and Pan-Africanism is dynamic and it's a global agenda. So I think there is a place for it. But as far as the basis, I don't think that because I mean a lot of these conflicts with African internationalism, there's a lot of ideological discussions as opposed to dealing with the material or grounded realities of it. So I think it has a significant role to play, and I think that any Pan-Africanism should have a working understanding of third world internationalism and intracommunalism. But I think we can tweak it. You know, it's a decades-old idea that emerged from a different geopolitical climate than today. You know, back then they were still thinking that the communists were going to be an ongoing threat to capitalism, and so that's
not the case.
my conclusion. Jamila also states that the idea of scientific socialism moving into transnational socialism, as we speak about Black Aboriginal political and cultural ideas with the continent and the diaspora. And so that was just a statement. I don't think that was a question. Pablo asks, Latin America descent peoples have a lot more American Indian than the made percentage you threw, bro. He said Latin American descendants have a lot more American Indian than the made percentage that you threw. I think it was he was speaking to me to say that Latin America, upwards of 90% of the populations were exterminated. I would say this, I had a good friend who was Cuban, and I talked to him about the conquistadors, the natives, and that region, not just in Cuba, but the Arawaks, the Kalinagos, the Tainos. And we talked about the conquistadors and the ideology, and what I know from knowing several Black and Native and white people from Latin America, Central America, and South America, and Latin nations in the Caribbean, is that it is racist, white dominated, and anti-Black.
And no question.
People there, right, even right now, and there's an ongoing extermination efforts in where did they just have that in places like Bolivia.
Yes.
When the native people, many of the most of the Caribbean nations have never had a native leadership or native elected to power. And then when we see people of native heritage come to power, like in places like Bolivia, Venezuela, where the white Venezuela, and you had mentioned also that not just U.S. slave-owning Confederates found a welcoming environments in Latin America, Central America, but so did the Nazis. The boys,
absolutely.
So Nazi ideology, Confederate ideology had found fertile ground in Latin America. And the breakdown of Latin America is the same as North America. White folks at the top and the natives under siege and genocide and black people under enslavement and discrimination to this day. And there was Brazil, which has the highest African diaspora population in the world, and African space lynchings, open racism and discrimination, and dehumanization in the media. So Latin American natives in Latin America, maybe I'm wrong about the percentage, but I'm not wrong about the conditions that they face and the racism. You know, the first time when people come to me in Chicago and say black and brown unity, the first thing I want to know is, what is your country of origin? You know, you're Puerto Rico. Dr. Ben was raised in Puerto Rico. And they had Jim Crow segregation in Puerto Rico. When he was coming up. Dominicans, do I need to speak about the Dominicans and their treatment of Haitians and black Dominicans? So,
well, let me help you with some of those percentages.
Okay.
So let me help you with some of those percentages. So, yeah, it all depends on what country. You know, not that I need to say, because I'm Panamanian. You know what I mean? My whole family speaks Spanish. But it all depends on the country you're talking about. You know, there's some question. Of course, the reality in the South American cone, whether you're speaking Portuguese or Spanish, it's all a question of what percentage of African, indigenous, or European you particularly are. But one thing that's clear is that African and indigenous switch places as to who's going to be most downtrodden based on how many of them there are in that particular country. All right. It's clear that if you are in Bolivia and you are an indigenous person, you're going to have a tough go. All you have to do is take a look at how the election of the first indigenous president was treated, and the right wing who cooed him out of power treated everyone in the country once they brought their person in. Or you could go take a look at a place like Argentina. Argentina, which used to have far more black, because there are a few black folk. People say all the time that, oh my God, they were all killed or got killed in the war. But the history of Argentina was clearly hyper racist. All right. So, I mean, there's no error in your statements other than just being very specific about, okay, what country are you dealing with? All right. Right. Brazil, huge African population. Argentina, huge European population, which was very friendly to Nazis and pretty much all right-wing ideologues. Okay. You can go to, say, Guyana, which is more complex, and you have this Asian population of Indian origin, which effectively acts like a right wing and tries to lock all the blacks and other indigenous out of power. All right. The British Guyana, that is. Okay. Right. So, yeah, I mean, things haven't really changed that much in Latin America. Except I must say in Latin America, there is a resurgence of Afro identity in many different regions. But yeah, but there's no error there. It's definitely true.
Well, here's my issue here. In the United States, the Latinx or Latino community, Hispanics, are a persecuted population. They are under political persecution, especially from the political right wing, but across the spectrum. There's a lot of jingoism and anti-immigrant sentiment in the United States, and it always gets exacerbated when there's political high joblessness and instability.
Of course,
they scapegoat the immigrants, and many black people who hold U.S. citizenship join with the white right wing in scapegoating and hostilities toward immigrant populations. I sympathize with that. But in that same vein, many of the people that we express solidarity with, because you can't find a black activist, whenever they say black, they say brown. Black and brown discrimination, black and brown police brutality, black and brown education deficits. They can't. But those exact same individuals we're calling solidarity with, when they go south of the border, they become the persecutors. They automatically become white, and they automatically re-engage as the upper echelon in their society. And so all I'm saying is that African people here need to start calling on the brown allies that we have here in the States to acknowledge, first of all, that condition of the native discrimination and anti-Black racism in Latin America, throughout the Latin Central America. Number one, acknowledge it. Number two, start to fight against it. As we have shown consistently, the Black left in the United States has always been pro-immigration and have always, everything from Palestine, same thing with I run into with Palestine.
Yep.
We show solidarity with the persecution of the Palestinian people, but when you go to Detroit or you go to other places, even in Latin America, that have large Palestinian populations, they want to join the status quo and engage in exploitation of the oppressed people of their adopted nation. But then they will also want to turn it around and expect us to have solidarity when they suffer. So same thing with white feminists. You know, they want to be racist and step on our necks, but when there's sexual, gender-based discrimination, they want the Black left to acknowledge and join with them. So that's all I'm saying. But if I'm wrong about the percentage, it's fine. You know, tweak the number however you work. The political reality and the racial reality is the same. All right, let's try. Let's try to just 1 or 2 sentence responses, and we're gonna try to run through as many. What is the social political end game of claiming FBA? Foundational Black America, Tariq Nasheed's new cult, secular cult.
Who's going to answer that one?
I'll say the social political end game is I call that prosperity politics. They want to use the suffering of African people to integrate Black people into the economy so that Black people can have a greater percentage of the spoils of empire. It's a movement to give Black people a greater access to material spoils of empire. And in exchange for greater access to the material spoils of empire, a check, more money, more ability to buy shit that the empire provides. In exchange for that, Black people will embrace the white empire and support white America's interest against all other populations, including those of Caribbean and African people and other members of the African diaspora. That's the end game.
I have to agree. It seems, whether FBA or ADOS, it seems like a delusional fantasy in which they become, literally, I'm using their own words, they become made white. And I guess they act as either proxies or become just like any other high white class in the United States. If that's the case, again, a delusional fantasy, then how are they any different in terms of an enemy from the actual controllers of the levers of power in the United States or Europe or anywhere else? If you wish to become the oppressor, I mean, the end game for you isn't going to be good if you are siding with them. That's what you seem to be doing. Is that what you want? Because it's clear that won't end well for them. Even again, a delusional fantasy, because that's seem to be trying to work toward. They want to just be them.
Well, what's going on with that is throughout starting in really the late 80s, but it really came into consolidated in the mid 90s, was the concept of prosperity gospel, which grew off of the roaring 90s under the Bill Clinton economy and the fall of communism and the unabridged capitalism. Everybody was going to get rich if you're just willing to work for it. That provoked a prosperity gospel. You know, if you just follow and submit to God, God will make you rich. That became discredited in the 2010s. The prosperity gospel just got discredited, but the desire for prosperity didn't go anywhere. So prosperity gospel morphed into prosperity politics. So prosperity politics was any political figure or any political movement that could promise you the same thing that prosperity gospel was going to give us. All of a sudden had literally millions of followers ready and ripe to receive that message. So they went from saying God will bless you with millions of dollars to the government will grant you millions of dollars for servitude to the government as opposed to submission to God. That's all that is. It's a petty hustle. And I hope before it does too much damage, it will fall by the wayside or go into the trash can of history, just like prosperity gospel is doing.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, anytime I see this ideology, I have to just ask pointed questions and challenge it because it is incredibly damaging. But you know, it's also fantastical in insofar as it doesn't require much work. I think that's the other thing that makes it really attractive. And I can name a few other interesting like movements or memes in Black community online that I find really problematic, but it doesn't require that much work. You just simply want good stuff that someone will grant you at the end of this.
Right.
I want to make a through line to some other things I've seen online, because I want to let you guys, the listeners, know something that I find is really, really a problem. I'm sorry if I make a tangent from the actual subject, but I really want to get this out there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Although I'm really active in the online world, I do a lot of actual monitoring for even statistical purposes. I don't run my own online show. I have a brother who does. I listen to his work. I listen to Diallo. I love a few other people. But I'm particularly concerned with the level of interest in, and this is not Diallo at all. I'll tell you that right now. But there's a lot of interest in pathological discussion within a lot of these online organs. And I want to show you how far that reach is reached. I teach students out here who are far removed from the American experience. And in a few occasions, my students will come to me and they'll give me talking points and insights into the Black society, family, relationships, that I have no idea how I have a similar insight into theirs. There's no place I could go and find that kind of ornate, detailed, pathological, sort of problematic information. I just feel concerned that so much of these discussions have become fodder for consumption by a lot of other people, all right? Because it's not just our music that's being absorbed, not our music, not just a culture or a language. It's a lot of our conversation pieces. And, I don't, when a Middle Eastern person approaches me, or someone from the Far East, because the large populations out here are people from the quote unquote Middle East, Far East, Southeast Asia, of course, the Aboriginal population. There's a growing number of continental Africans and North American Africans coming out here. But they have information that I find like, wow, how do you know that? Why do you know this? All right. Something for consideration. Maybe you guys have a questions or for the future that I want you to know. If you ever, well, it's different over there, but I'm just so far away from it. And I hear people come to me and say these things. I find, I don't agree with it. I don't like it.
Yeah. Well, Lifeblood also asks, is FBA a necessity for freedom of Black people in America? Well, the answer to that is no. They don't want freedom. They want integration. The opposite of freedom is not actually slavery. The opposite of freedom is integration. Amos Wilson said that to fully integrate with them means we have to erase ourselves or seek erasure of ourselves. And FBA and ADOS said they want to be made white. They want that colorblind society that people, or post-racial society that people were talking about with the election of Obama. They still think that's a possibility. They want to be able to walk the street where a policeman pulls up and just sees an American. They don't see a Black man. Right. They want to be made white. So no, they don't want freedom, and it's not a path to freedom. Fiat isn't freedom. I need to put that on a shirt. Fiat ain't freedom. But then I got to speak to people who think that I'm pro-poverty. I get that a lot too. They don't understand socialism. If you're a capitalist, you're pro-poverty. You're pro. Socialists are not pro-poverty. But I'll deal with that on my own time. I'm not going to. Okay, we're going to try to rapid fire these. We're doing a horrible job at this rapid fire thing. I just want you to know. Someone asked, have you heard about the ghost DNA theory in West Africa?
If you're referring to the DNA that's popping up in various different populations of Africa, from all over Africa, that cannot be identified, yes. As I said before, there were a few different population geneticists, good ones anyway, who are talking about the likelihood that we should be able to find different segments of DNA that are unidentifiable as far as knowing what population they came from. And interestingly enough, again, the popularity of genetic tests has been kind of instrumental in identifying some of this stuff. All right. So yeah, one of the other misconceptions you have to get out of your mind is that the idea that the human genome is completely understood is wrong. We've decoded the genome. We know where all the ACTGs are, but we can't identify nowhere near the entirety of what they do. There are a few different markers here and there, and they generally, I mean, I have a problem even with stating which particular haplogroup a group may belong to, because we're not really sure where it originated. We're still in our infancy of understanding this. Okay. So if you do take a genetic test, I've taken like 4 of them or whatnot, take it with a grain of salt. They're generally good, but take it with a grain of salt because we haven't identified nowhere near all of them. Okay. So yeah.
I'm going to rush you. I mean, that's a good answer.
Good.
I ain't taking that test. They ain't going to hit me at a lax my DNA. I ain't taking that damn test. You go ahead.
They got me.
Just send me a copy of yours. I'll forge that and say it's fine. I ain't doing that shit. Man. Sorry for the ignorance. I get thrown off by this 100,000 of years. Is there a simplified way you can explain how scientists calculate how old a fossil is?
Really quickly. Yeah. There are a few different ways that you can actually test for the age of an actual fossil. All right. You can test. The easiest way that people know is just use the you can test for the decay of carbon-14. It's the easiest way to test. It's very easy to do. If carbon-14 is best for nothing older than, like, say, 40 or 50,000 years. But for 100,000 years, there are other things like potassium argon tests. There's you can test it by relative dating. If you know what layer of the Earth it's in, and you already have testing for something else in the same strata, you can test it relative to that. There's a few other more arcane ways, but yeah, it's we can clearly date organic material. It can be done. It's really easy to do. Okay.
All right. Next, Chauncey, STEM over STEAM. I agree with you, Chauncey. Chauncey, that's my man there. That's my brother, co-conspirator. But I'm going to add another letter to that. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. I say we need STREAM. Science, technology, revolution, engineering, arts, and math. So that's my thing. That's what I advocate for, STREAM, because I mean, we could be the most brilliant scientists in the world, and then we turn around and, you know, a black man made the tungsten filament for the light bulb, and ain't no black light bulb companies, you know, combustion engines, or you got black women making guidance systems for satellites, and those satellites are now targeting. So absolutely, if you ain't revolutionary with it, so I ain't trying to. I know I'm gonna hear from Chauncey. But I say STREAM over STEAM.
Can I just say something on that one? I absolutely agree with you. A very long time ago, I wanted to be an aerospace engineer, and I stopped that because, you know, very early I had my political education under my father and a few other groups, and I understood that, you know, if I develop weapons, all I ever wanted to do was be a pilot and fly pretty much weapons of mass destruction. I was watching all those airplane movies back in the day. Then I figured out, you know, I'm going to be using these to just destroy people who look just like me, or whatever technological invention I have was probably going to be co-opted by the dominant government. That's just something I couldn't participate in. So yeah, STREAM definitely. You need a political education to make sure you use your gifts for the right reasons. Right.
So now we got some criticism for you, Loxz. Everybody love me, but people got problems with you. Preston John states that he's got 3 posts back to back. Let me just run it down to you. He states that Loxz is running defense for Neanderthals, a hyper-violent humanoid who was plagued with harmful genetic mutations due to thousands of years of inbreeding. Michael Bradley was right. You can't turn a cave beast into a housewife.
Wow. Man.
Go on. You want to respond to that, or you just want to accept that beat?
Man. Ooh, Neanderthal getting beat down all over the place.
And you know, Neanderthal level. You run a defense for the Neanderthal.
I would love to respond to the question of Neanderthals and exactly who the Neanderthals are a misunderstood offshoot. Imagine this. They're like the, you know what I'm saying, the stepchild who gets beat up on because Europeans fell in love with them first, and now we want to beat up on them because the European scientists at one point were in love with the idea that they were actually coming from Neanderthals. And that's useful for us, I think, ideologically, because we also want a club with which to beat up Neanderthals. I'm just saying, when you study the data of who came first, second, and understand who Neanderthals were, Neanderthals have really nothing to do with Europeans other than that which will become European. Wipe them out, bred them out. Who knows? Who knows? All right. All I'm saying is Neanderthals are kind of misunderstood in the record. All right. Yeah, I read Michael Bradley's work too. I read it years ago. You know what I mean? And his insights into European culture on point, but he's using imagery from the Neanderthal that's kind of outdated. That's all I'm saying. I ain't trying to cape for Neanderthals. I'm just trying to be honest about what he was in the historical record.
But his anthropology work in there is good, where he talks about the Japanese architecture and boat construction and African everything from agriculture to architecture. But you just But I ain't gonna take. You can have your Neanderthal love. Go ahead and run with that. We're gonna move on. Is pygmyism a defect, and is there any racist or just discriminating theories we should be aware about them? Is pygmyism a defect, and is there any racist or just discriminating theories? Real quick, we gotta run. We got a bunch.
All right, really quick. If you're talking about the group of humans who are in the equatorial region of Africa, who are on average like 5'4", 5'5", 5'6", no, that's just a normal variation in human morphology. It's not the same as the congenital condition that leads to dwarfism. It's nowhere near the same thing. You're just dealing with a group of people who on average grow to a height of, if you're women, between 4'8", 5'2", if you're men, between I think 5 feet and 5'4". It's just normal human variation. I mean, if you go within just the African continent, you can find all the varieties of human being that you can find magnified outside of the actual continent. What am I talking about? If you want to find types who are a little more light skinned, if you want to find even a few that are light eyed, relatively speaking, you want to find different grades of hair. It's not all because of recent introduction of, say, European and an Arab admixture. It's just there's incredibly varied morphology amongst Black populations in Africa. That's all it really is.
It wasn't Yakub? Didn't make... Okay.
Nah, my man Yakub. My man Yakub, nah.
Please, where can we follow you? Where can we follow you? At neanderthallove.com. Where can people follow you, find, your musings and thoughts? Do you have a blog or a website?
I've been trying to start a blog. I have a if you look at Grimlox on Instagram, there's a bare bones thing there. But I'm not really making any posts. If my Instagram is probably gonna turn into a compendium of all my old I used to be a photographer, a rather good one, and I'm probably gonna start putting photography like 30 years ago on there. But if you're talking about to follow me in terms of politically or in terms of science or culture, I don't really have anywhere online. Every now and then I'll pop in on, let's say, my brother or Diallo's show, but what you guys do is a lot of work, Diallo. I'm gonna tell you right now. You do a lot of work, dude. And I don't know if I can take time from where, my own research and family and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of work, dude. Hats off to you. Hats off, because I know what I do to write a paper, and you're doing it on a weekly basis, Dukes.
Yeah.
Yo, give it up to cats who run their own YouTube platforms. I don't know if I can take that hat on right now. I just don't know if I could do that.
All right, so you can find Grimlox here. I'm gonna pray that he comes back, put the spirit and put that energy, positive energy. Now let me stop talking crazy. But I mean, I'm gonna definitely make requests to have you back, and I ain't gonna be bothering you on a weekly or monthly basis. But you can find him here on BroDiallo show, because we got a lot more stuff to get into, and I'm sure he wants to share more insights and love for his Neanderthal ancestors. So let me stop.
Yo, I'm sorry. Can I just say one thing? I really apologize if I sound a little confusing, only because, dude, Diallo, I don't know how you're doing it, man. I've been hearing the feedback the entire time. I've been having a hell of a time following some of your stuff there, my man. It's
I'm
crazy.
Sorry. Once I put the headphones in, I was good. I don't normally wear the headphones, but once I put them in, I'm good. I'm sorry. Next time I have you on, I will deal with, because there is an issue with the sound. I don't think I put in the right speaker, but I'm afraid to try to change it now. And because coming towards the end, it might drop everything. But next time, I will address this sound issue.
Okay, that's all good.
Mark, I'm just trying to get in the last few. So Diallo, how is a people whose history dripping in blood and murder seen as a model for what human beings should be? I don't think that they are.
No.
That model. So that was an easy question. Shortcakes K. Some ADOS people don't. That's Irene. Okay, I think they're responding to someone else. Is junk DNA just unidentifiable DNA? Phil asks.
Junk DNA. Well,
quick, as quickly as possible.
It can't. Some of it's unidentified. Some of it may be DNA that's just the verdict is still out on what exactly the usage to the organism of junk DNA. With the emergence of epigenetics and the understanding that the genome can be altered at the individual level after the fact, we're still trying to figure out whether or not the various parts of your DNA can be affected by environmental issues. It can be affected by psychological issues. If you're exposed to certain sorts of chemicals, it can turn on or turn off. Again, I have to impress upon people the fact that we know DNA is there and it's used in the construction of an organism is not the end of the story on DNA. We're learning things all the time in terms of how this affects an organism and if it can be passed on in terms of our lineage. All right. So the junk DNA, we're not sure. That's the answer. Some of it we know, some of it we don't know. We're still trying to figure out exactly what all the DNA does. Think of the DNA as an orchestra. All of them have their role. None of them can just be popped out and produce the same sound. Okay.
All right. Diallo, you should consider race and eugenics expert Milton Reynolds for the show. I definitely will. I appreciate recommendations. I'm going to make a note of that. Moving on. Prester, your critic, says that the Genome Project told on Caucasians.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, you're right. I agree. It did.
Europeans tried. Prester John also states Europeans tried to distance themselves from Neanderthal until the Genome Project told on them. Okay.
It did.
Wangisi states that they're not 5'4". I'm 5, and a grown male pygmy is about 4 feet. So,
have I got my feet off?
I don't know. She's from Kenya. They do kilograms, and they're on the standard system. So, you know.
Yeah.
The sister says no. She's not a pygmy. She's taller than a pygmy. So don't put her in.
I may have gotten my measurements off.
All right. Well, okay, but we know they're looka. I mean, pygmy.
They're very exactly.
What we our go-to name for short people. Kendake asks, can you get him back again? Are you coming back on the BroDiallo broadcast?
Oh, yeah, if you want to have me, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a yes. That's a definite. Any publications that are good on Aboriginal culture in Australia?
Wow. Nothing recent. Yes, but you know what? This is where come to my Instagram account. Because I found a ton of good stuff by Aboriginal activists, websites that are updated constantly that you definitely need. You know what? Why don't you go look up the website for Gary Foley? He's an Aboriginal activist who's one of the first Black Panthers in Australia. He still does really good stuff. You want to get an insight into Aboriginal activism from the perspective of a Black Panther that goes back to the 60s in Australia, look up Uncle Gary Foley. You're going to find tons of stuff by this man. Great speaker. He's been in the battle from the beginning.
Okay.
Gary Foley.
Good job. Good job. Yeah, nice and sweet. Shortcakes said that she had a typo earlier. Shortcake state, I meant they don't want to be made white only. Yvette Carnell and Tyreek folks do. So the desire to be made white that this person is claiming is only applies to the leadership or a certain fringe element of the ADOS and FBI movement, but not the other ADOS folks. I know that's not connected to them. So there is, well, I don't know if you're following ADOS here in the States while you're in the land down under, but they are fractionalizing and factionalizing, and there's a lot of infighting and criticisms and
right now. I do follow them.
Okay,
really.
So there apparently are some who just want the cash, but because to be made white, when Yvette stated that she wanted to be made white and wrapped herself in the U.S. flag, literally,
I do remember that. Yeah,
she was stating that they wanted all the status, rights, and privileges that having a citizenship of the United States affords them, along with the money, because the money is great, and they want the money, they want the check, cut the check, tangibles, but they also want the ability to behave as white people do without the consequences that are imposed on Black people when we try to act and functions as full citizens of the United States. So what she meant, that was just an extreme way of saying that they don't literally want to have white skin. And I ain't about to list white features. They don't want to be Neanderthals. They just want all the rights and privileges afforded to Neanderthals. Let's just say that. So
got you.
I don't agree that ADOS folks don't, because I know several ADOS.
Okay.
I on the most recent mayoral campaign, part of the candidate whose campaign I worked on and constructed policy for, reparations and Black specific policies were a part of his campaign, and so it attracted a lot of ADOS people to his platform. Okay. And so I've interacted with a lot of rank and file ADOS activists, and they all, in the context that Yvette said, they all want to be made white. In fact, a lot of Black people who aren't ADOS want to be made white in the context that they want to be able to function in America as white people do. They want to be equal to oppressors.
Yeah.
You know, which I don't think. I think that is a fatalistic and ultimately suicidal agenda to be equal to white people. I think you require a deep-seated ignorance of white history and a unawareness of the trajectory of white people and even the trajectory of the U.S. empire to want to get in the same Titanic boat with white people. We need to chart a divergent path. I think we need to diverge from white. And I'm not a Black separatist, we got to have our own land. But in terms of their economy, their politics, their ideology, their relationship to the ecosystems of the world, their national, I think Black people need to diverge from white folks, not to merge with white folks. So,
yeah, I'll say in conclusion, as far as ADOS, I think it's important that I state that, the idea of being made white, it's not just, ADOS folk who are stuck with this. If you go to Europe, Black folk in the UK or France and whatnot, or certainly in Latin America, you have the same sort of sickness that infects our folks. So I'm just opposed to it anywhere I find my Black people. I'm just opposed to it. Any sort of descent into hyper-factionalism or an embracing of ideas that I find toxic to humans anywhere, how they organize socially, economically, certainly their stance toward the rest of the environment. Yeah, I have to be opposed to that. So, I think it's important we also state that ADOS aren't the first to espouse the idea that they need to be made white. You can go to Latin America and see that as well. I mean, a lot of different places. I'm opposed to it anywhere I find it.
David, brother David, another good brother, states that white people are not my equal, in my opinion. Yeah, I don't support that. I think equality is an absurd notion, and it's tied to oppression. I don't think anybody's equal, and I don't think that equality should be the goal, and I don't think equality is synonymous with justice. So Shortcake said land rights, freedoms, laws change for blacks. I'm Pan-African, but I support some ADOS things. I think Shortcake, you're confused. ADOS is a parasitic movement. The reparations struggle, if you go back to all the way back to the Niagara movement, but the more contemporary reparations struggle with the late Dr. Conrad Worrell, with Samori Grace, based out of Kansas City, in Cobra, the reparations struggle was a Pan-African struggle. It was a struggle that stood in solidarity with the African diaspora and the struggles of the African continent. So the ADOS has grafted or contaminated many just struggles for Black empowerment, Black economic development, and things of that nature. So you don't need to say you support some things at ADOS, because everything positive in ADOS, you can't hear me?
Oh, I hear you.
I'm saying everything positive in ADOS are things that the ADOS movement did not originate. They have grafted themselves onto these long-standing struggles and efforts and contaminated them with white coded Black nationalism, or Black nationalism in whiteface, or whatever you want to call it. So fuck ADOS and fuck Foundational Black America. Fuck them. You know that, but I'm sorry. You're trying to be academics. I'm sorry, bro.
It's all good.
I'll edit that out. No, I won't. So I think we'll have to wrap it up. There's some comments, but I really appreciate you, brother. And I shout out, I don't remember who recommended that I call you. You know, we've been in dialogue and in contact for many years, but we haven't had an opportunity to really chop it up like this. And I look forward to not just having you back on the show, but our continued dialogue.
Sure.
And I'm going to come up with my jokes about Australia and the land down under to throw your way. So, you know, I don't really get to make fun of Black people in Australia enough, you know. So I'm gonna come up with some insults about Australia.
It's all good too.
You got any parting words for the BroDiallo show listeners and supporters?
No, boy, there's so much more we had to cover. I really wish we could cover. I mean, one of the things I wanted to actually have a conversation on. Let me put it out there. Like I said, my world is more in international affairs now, and I wanted to see if I could give you guys an insight into what's happening in terms of how other world polities are looking at that nation you inhabit right now, for those who are still in the United States. Because of the instability of the last 4 years, there are really growing moves in other sectors of white power, but also Asian power, to try and eject or throw loose the shackles of having to toe the line of U.S. foreign policy. I really want people to pay attention to that, because I was just in a meeting yesterday. I was a fly on the wall, really. And I can already see that, other centers of power are champing at the bit to try and throw off the current big boy on the block. And the instability of these last 4 years has made it clear to other centers of power that this may be their chance. Now, I only bring this up because you live right next to or within those who may be losing power on a global scale. Now, maybe I'm overblowing it, but that's not the kind of conversations I hear being made there. And I want us to be a little bit more circumspect about some larger conversations that you can't ignore, because those in power are making moves. And they're like, listen, not all of the centers of power agree with each other. They're in competition with each other too. And if they have an opportunity to, they're looking to try and supplant that country known as the U.S. And I see things. All right, we can have a show on that at some point. I'll bring a lot more documentation so we could talk about how that will affect you wherever you live right now. All right.
I mean, I did a whole show on my radio broadcast on local radio here, called The Myth of White Unity, because there's a lot of Black people who are claiming to organize Black people locally, regionally, globally for power, and they still have that old intellectual laziness of saying, oh, all white folks are the same. No. So they don't really, and it's just disturbing to me to see how white people identify and research and dissect the most minute differences within the Black community, within the Black race. They understand what's the beef between Southern Baptists and Northern Black folks. They understand the difference between Kikuyu and Luo, Yoruba. They understand, they know the beef between Black secular folks and Black vegans and Black meat eaters. They understand all that. You will never find a white person in power or seeking to sustain power say all Blacks are the same. You might find some redneck in the trailer park, but when anybody interested in power will never fail to recognize the minute or distinct conflicts and differences and uniqueness of the factions that they're opposing. So I gotta have you back. My listeners were very receptive. People are worried about you. They said you look like you're suffering. You have a headache or something.
No, I'm concentrating, trying to hear.
All right. So that's it. Oh, I gotta play the outro music, or else I won't. I'll be haunted through the night. So I'm gonna play my outro and wish it express my appreciation. You can support the Bro.Diallo show broadcast, my radio program, my weekly Q&As, my book reviews, and all of my efforts to share Pan-African ideology and advance the Pan-African agenda through the Pan-African perspective. You can support me through Patreon/Diallo Kenyatta, CashApp, $, Bro.Diallo, all that. Like, subscribe, share this program with your friends, allies, lovers, and enemies, so that we can continue to expand the community and expand the discourse. And that's it. So we're going to play our outro music, and I'll see you guys Monday for the Bro.Diallo show, which is Where the Money Reside, a socialist guide to becoming a billionaire. So if you want to be a billionaire, tune in to the Bro.Diallo radio broadcast, Q4 radio, AM or Signal or on the internet. All right, and good night, Graham. Get some rest. I'm sorry for the headaches I caused you. Leave them Neanderthals alone. They don't love you back. All right, bro. Peace.
All right, yo, cool.
Peace. All right.